Her daughter left her standing in the rain outside the very house she'd paid for. Eleanor Grady, 68, didn't beg for shelter. Michelle, the girl she'd once trusted with her future, thought the locks would keep her safe. By the time the year ended, Michelle would owe her mother more than she could ever repay. Eleanor had been shut out of her own home, now she was shutting her daughter out of hers, and when the final bill came due, it would cost Michelle far more than money. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The storm didn't hurt. The locked door did. The wind combed the maples along the street, tugging at Eleanor Grady's sleeves, as if it knew better than to let go. The paper sack from the pharmacy grew soft in her palm, warm from the takeout meatloaf that leaked a buttery smell through the top. Rain began as a polite patter, then, like most politeness lately, thinned into a lie. She stepped onto the porch, that shallow rectangle where muddy boots and birdseed used to gather. The porch light blinked awake at her arrival. Her key slid into the lock the way it always had. It just didn't turn. She tried again. The lock clicked once, then held itself stiff, a little brass jaw clamped shut. Her hand smelled of paper, metal, and damp wool. The meatloaf's aroma clung, suddenly too rich. Maybe the wood had swelled, she thought. Boise's spring rain does that. Makes everything fat and stubborn. She jiggled the key, called out once, her voice swallowed by the porch. No answer. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked at nothing. Her phone felt colder than it should as she called Michelle. The first ring cycle died. The second went unanswered. Then a text appeared. "We're at a school thing. Can't deal right now." The rain thickened into needles, cool against her neck. She set the paper sack on the wicker bench, its cushion drinking in a dark crescent of wet. Fishing under the bench, she found the old black umbrella with the wooden crook handle. The fabric felt papery thin from years of Idaho wind. She snapped it open. The sound of rain on it was soft and insistent, like fingers drumming on a table where she had no seat. The street smelled of wet mulch and exhaust. A neighbor's flag slapped its pole. A passing car smeared its headlights across her shoes, the driver offering a curious glance at the older woman, perched on her own step like a guest who didn't know the rules. She typed slowly. "The key doesn't work." 3 dots appeared, vanished, returned. "We changed the locks."
Talk later.
Later. Michelle had always treated that word like soft clay, pressing her thumb into it until the shape suited her. Eleanor stayed. Where else was there to go, with her name still printed on the tax bills stacked in the attic? The rain stitched a seam along her shoulder. A gust caught the umbrella, turning it inside out. An old Idaho trick. She brought it back into shape. She had been doing that in this house for 42 years, turning things back into shape. When headlights finally swept up the driveway, the air carried the scent of bleach, popcorn, and the school gym. Laughter floated ahead of them. The porch light blinked awake again. Trevor saw her first, his smile collapsing mid-curve. "Eleanor," his voice was thin, guilty. He unlocked the door from the inside. "Sorry, didn't know you were out here that long." The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and wet wool. Khloe lingered near the stairs, sneakers damp, rain freckles bright on her cheeks. 10 years old and careful. Her gaze slid to the umbrella, then back to Eleanor, a question unasked. Michelle unwound her scarf without meeting her eyes. "Why didn't you go to Gloria's?" she said, like she was asking why Eleanor had chosen the wrong bus route. The answer, "Because this is my house," rose to her lips but stopped there. She placed the paper sack on the entry table, folded the umbrella shut with a sigh of fabric. Trevor shuffled junk mail into a neat pile. "We were at the talent show," he said too casually. "They did the anthem with kazoos." Khloe stepped closer, brushed the wet hem of Eleanor's coat, then withdrew her hand. "Grandma, were you cold?" she asked quietly. "I've been colder," Eleanor replied. Michelle lifted her chin. "We'll talk tomorrow," she said, managerial and final. "Tomorrow," Eleanor echoed, the word heavier in her mouth. Later in her rental, she hung her coat, emptied her pockets, and let the rain whisper against the eaves. She opened the beige filing cabinet in her bedroom, its lock sticking for a heartbeat before giving way. Inside, beneath old papers and a recipe in her mother's hand, lay the deed to the house, heavy, inked, and waiting. The rain had stopped by morning, but the dampness clung to Eleanor's skin like a memory that didn't want to leave. She sat at her small kitchen table, the deed spread open under a pool of weak sunlight, the black ink as sharp as the day it had been signed. The coffee in her cup had gone lukewarm. She didn't drink it. Her thumb tapped against the edge of the paper, a slow, steady rhythm. Then she picked up her phone and scrolled to a name she hadn't called in months. When Gloria Sims answered, her voice carried the same dry wit it always had. "Tell me you're not calling to sell me vitamin supplements. I'm cashing in on something we talked about," Eleanor said. "It's time." There was a pause, just enough for the weight of those words to settle. "Give me an hour," Gloria replied, the sound of rustling papers in the background. An hour later, Eleanor was sitting across from Gloria in the cramped back office of the Strip Plaza's law firm, where the smell of toner and old carpet mixed with the faint tang of lemon disinfectant. The hum of the copy machine in the front lobby was constant, like a metronome ticking towards something inevitable. Gloria slid a thin stack of files across the desk. 14 years ago, you remember? I remember being told it was the only way to get the low-interest refinance Michelle wanted, Eleanor said, flattening her palm against the top page. That's because you were the only one who could qualify at the time, Gloria said, adjusting her glasses. So the house title was temporarily transferred to Michelle's name on paper, but the original note, she tapped the document, still lists you as the primary grantor. Eleanor leaned in, reading her own name where she hadn't seen it in years. It looked almost defiant, printed in bold legal font. Gloria flipped to another page, her tone turning sharper. Here's the kicker. Michelle never filed the final ownership transfer with the county clerk. Technically, you still hold partial control. Eleanor blinked slowly. She didn't finish the paperwork. Not only that, Gloria continued, but she hasn't been paying the back taxes on your portion. We're talking 3 years' worth. If someone say, you requested a financial audit, the ledger would show she owes you. The thought of Michelle, so careful about her image and appearances, being forced to account for every cent, it settled in Eleanor's chest like a steady warmth. Gloria's mouth curved, just slightly. If you want to force her hand, you can, you'd have every legal right. And once the county records catch up, she'll realize she's been living in a house that isn't entirely hers to control. Eleanor traced the line where her name met Michelle's. I don't want to evict them, she said, her voice low but steady. I want them to pay. Financially, in every way that counts. Gloria's eyes glinted with a mix of curiosity and respect. You've got the leverage, Ellie. Use it. Eleanor walked out of the law office into the pale midday light, the sky still swollen with clouds that hadn't made up their mind. Across the street, the local diner's neon sign blinked half-heartedly, a red O flickering out of sync. Through the window she could see the usual gathering of retirees, men in baseball caps, women with hair curled into weekly appointments, leaning in over coffee cups. She kept walking. The air smelled faintly of rain and fried onions. The wind caught the loose ends of her scarf, snapping them across her shoulder like punctuation. At the corner, she stopped. The documents in her bag seemed heavier than paper should be. She thought about Michelle's voice last night, cool and managerial, telling her tomorrow. She thought about Khloe's question, her little fingers brushing Eleanor's coat. She pulled her phone from her pocket, scrolled to another name, one she had never needed before. The line rang twice before a man answered, his tone measured. Victor Lee. Eleanor's voice didn't waver. Do you do quiet liens? There was a pause, then a slow intrigue. Tell me more. Victor Lee's office smelled faintly of old law books and fresh coffee, a mix that suggested he'd been doing this work long enough to know exactly where the bodies were buried and how to leave them there. The rain from yesterday had left the parking lot outside, shimmering with puddles, and the light through the blinds striped his desk in bands of silver and shadow. He studied the stack of documents Eleanor and Gloria had laid in front of him, flipping pages with the easy confidence of someone who had seen worse and won anyway. The scratch of paper under his fingertips was slow, deliberate, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the quiet click of his pen. When he reached the final page, he leaned back, one brow lifting, then unexpectedly, he chuckled. Not the polite kind, but the low, satisfied kind that came from seeing a plan practically right itself. They used you to qualify for equity, he said, meeting Eleanor's eyes, and never paid your portion forward. This is leverage, Eleanor. The words landed like a stone dropped into a still pond, ripples moving outward. Eleanor didn't smile. She only sat straighter, her hands folded in her lap. Victor pushed the papers aside, and reached for a legal pad. Here's what we do. I'll draft a lien against the property. Not just any lien. A trigger lien. Any attempt to sell, refinance or take out a new line of credit will set it off. They won't be able to move a dime without you knowing, and without paying what they owe. Gloria's mouth twitched upward. And here I thought you only handled wills for bickering cousins. Victor smirked but didn't look up from his notes. This is cleaner than eviction and far more permanent. As he began typing the draft on his computer, the quiet rhythm of the keys filled the room. Eleanor watched his hands, noting the precision, every letter placed like it was a nail in the frame of a house Michelle thought she owned. 2 days later, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea that had already gone cold. Gloria called, her voice brisk with satisfaction. Tracking alerts live. Any move they make through the credit union, you'll get a ping. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the window, where a pale sky hung low over Boise's tidy grid of houses. In her mind, she could see the kitchen she used to know. Oak cabinets, a dent in the fridge door from when Trevor dropped a can of peaches. Now she imagined Michelle standing there, picking out paint swatches with the air of someone who believed in unlimited credit. She didn't have to imagine for long. That afternoon, passing the house on her way to the market, Eleanor saw contractors' vans parked in the driveway. Rolls of backsplash tile leaned against the porch railing. Through the open window, she caught the sound of a drill and Michelle's voice, bright and commanding. The sight tightened something in her chest. Not from envy, but from the knowledge that every inch of glossy new countertop was being paid for with money that wasn't entirely Michelle's. The following Saturday, Khloe came to visit. They walked the quiet streets, the air cool enough to carry the scent of distant rain. Khloe kicked at loose gravel, her small voice breaking the silence. "Grandma, why don't you live with us anymore?" Her tone wasn't accusing, just curious, as if she'd been holding the question behind her teeth for weeks. Eleanor glanced at her, the girl's hair ruffling in the breeze. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "people make it hard to share a house. Even family." Khloe thought about that, then nodded, though the faint crease in her forehead said she didn't entirely understand. They passed a row of mailboxes. Eleanor's fingers brushed her own as she checked it, finding nothing but flyers. The air smelled faintly of pine and wet paper. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. White, official, with the bank's return address printed in sharp black. Eleanor's hands stayed steady as she slid it open, the paper whispering like a warning. Inside, the letter was brief. "We have received an application for a renovation loan on the property at..." Her eyes stopped there. Michelle's name sat under the applicant line. Eleanor's mouth curved, not in joy but in the quiet satisfaction of a plan about to meet its first test. The call came mid-morning, while Eleanor was folding laundry in the small rental's living room. The voice on the other end was warm, almost apologetic, but carried that careful edge all bank employees seemed to master. "Mrs. Grady, we're calling to confirm a lien listed under your name on the property at..." The rep paused, as if waiting for her to deny it. "Yes," Eleanor said, her tone polite and unhurried. "That's valid." There was a click of keys in the background, the soft shuffle of paperwork. "I see. Thank you for your time." Eleanor hung up, folding a towel with deliberate precision. Through the window, the day looked harmless. Sun pooling across the street, a faint breeze carrying the smell of cut grass. But somewhere across town, Michelle's dream kitchen had just collided with a brick wall. The storm at her door came 2 hours later. Michelle didn't knock, she pounded. Eleanor opened the door to find her daughter standing on the stoop, her face flushed, hair escaping from a hurried bun. "You blocked my loan," Michelle said, no greeting, no pause. Eleanor stepped aside, letting her in. "I enforced what's mine. How could you do this to us?" Michelle's voice cracked, but not from grief, more like the strain of holding on to control. Eleanor set the folded towel on the arm of the couch. "You already did it to me." Trevor followed in a moment later, slower, shoulders hunched as though he'd been dragged along. "Maybe we can all just—" Eleanor cut him off, her voice still even. "This is what happens when you let silence be permission." Trevor's gaze dropped. Michelle's eyes darted around the room, as if looking for proof she could use, some sign that her mother was the villain she wanted her to be. They didn't notice Khloe until she stepped out from behind Trevor. She'd come along quietly, a backpack slung over one shoulder, a small notebook clutched to her chest. While Michelle argued about family loyalty and bad optics, Khloe slipped toward Eleanor. She reached out, wrapping her arms around her grandmother's waist in a quick, almost guilty hug. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're not bad, you're just finally saying it out loud." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she kept her hand resting lightly on the girl's back until Khloe pulled away. Michelle caught the tail end of the gesture, her mouth hardening. "Don't drag her into this," she snapped. Eleanor didn't respond. She didn't need to. Khloe's words were already in the room, unshakable. After they left, the air felt lighter. Eleanor stood at the window, watching Michelle's SUV back out of the driveway too fast. The rumble of the engine faded, replaced by the faint rattle of wind through the maple out front. She had just settled back into the couch when her phone rang again. The number was local, the voice on the line brisk and businesslike. "Mrs. Grady, this is the utilities department. We're reaching out to inform you that payments for the account at your former residence have been stopped." Eleanor frowned. "I haven't lived there for months." "Yes, ma'am, but the account is still under your name. Water and power services are at risk of disconnection unless the balance is brought current." The words sat heavy in the quiet room. She thought of Michelle, standing in her half-finished kitchen, choosing which bills to ignore. "Understood," Eleanor said. "Please send me the full statement." When she hung up, she sat very still, the quiet broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. The lien had been her opening move. Now Michelle had handed her another card to play. The utility office on Main smelled faintly of burnt coffee and plastic binders, its lobby warmed by a space heater that ticked like an impatient clock. Eleanor stood at the counter with a manila folder tucked under her arm, her winter coat still buttoned, a faint trace of damp air clinging to her hair. The clerk, a woman with chipped coral nail polish and the politeness of someone who had seen every kind of argument, took the folder and opened it. Inside were neatly arranged pages, proof of Eleanor's new residence, a copy of the lease, and the date her move had been finalized. "You want your name removed from the service account?" the clerk asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Immediately." The woman tapped her keyboard, her rings clicking against the keys. "And you're aware there's an outstanding balance?" Eleanor nodded. "I'm aware. It's not mine." The printer whirred, spitting out a form that smelled faintly of fresh toner. Eleanor signed with a steady hand. By that afternoon, Victor had the paperwork in his office. He reviewed the account history, his brow lifting at the string of unpaid months. 11 months of fees, all attached to you?" he said. "This is almost impressive in its audacity." Eleanor sat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Can you make her responsible for every cent?" He leaned back, considering her for a beat before nodding. "Not only can I, but I'll make it official. Once the motion is filed, it's her name on the debt, and the utility company will have to go after her directly." "Do it," she said. Victor smiled without warmth. Gladly. The cut came 2 days later. No water, no power. The March air wasn't freezing, but it was cold enough to make tile floors feel like slabs of ice. Trevor called Eleanor just before noon, his voice tight. "Look, I know you're mad, but can't you just fix this?" "Trevor," she said evenly, "I didn't break it. This is Khloe's home too. Khloe's welcome here anytime." There was a pause, a faint clatter in the background, like someone rummaging through a drawer for candles. "You're making your point," he muttered. "This isn't a point," Eleanor replied. "It's a bill, one you've been ignoring." That evening, there was a knock at her door, not the sharp, entitled rhythm of Michelle, but a hesitant three-tap pattern. Eleanor opened it to find Khloe standing there with her backpack and a puffy pink coat zipped to her chin. "Mom said I could stay until they sort things out," Khloe said. Her eyes darted past Eleanor, as if making sure the warm glow inside was real. Eleanor stepped aside. "Come in." Khloe dropped her backpack with a soft thud and peeled off her coat, breathing in the scent of Eleanor's living room, cedar from the old chest, faint cinnamon from the tea cooling on the table. Across town, Michelle was telling neighbors it was all billing confusion. She framed it as a bureaucratic mix-up, her voice pitched just high enough to carry in the diner, where the Saturday breakfast crowd lingered over their coffee. But what Michelle didn't know was that Gloria had already slipped into a booth with a regular who had a mouth like a megaphone and a memory for details. Gloria told the lien story in low, conspiratorial tones, letting each fact land like a drop of ink in water, spreading slow, unstoppable. By the time she left, 2 tables had gone quiet mid-forkful. On Monday, Eleanor found the envelope in her mailbox. Thick paper, county seal, her name and Michelle's side by side in black type. She carried it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and slid it open with the butter knife she kept by the sugar jar. Notice of pre-foreclosure, the header read. Below, in precise legal language, it explained that missed equity payments had triggered the process. She read it twice, the words settling into her, like the last piece of a puzzle she'd been assembling in secret. The lien had stopped Michelle from borrowing. The utilities had shifted the debt, and now the house itself was sliding out from under her daughter's feet. Eleanor set the letter down beside her tea. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with the sound of paper being turned. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. Michelle's voice hit the ceiling first, then ricocheted down the hall of her still half-redone kitchen. The mortgage company had put her on hold for 12 minutes before delivering the sentence that made her pacing turn sharp. "Your co-owner filed the claim," the rep had said, polite and final. Any foreclosure activity would be under both names. Michelle had gripped the edge of the countertop until her knuckles went pale. "There's no foreclosure," she'd insisted, as though saying it aloud could make it untrue. Trevor had been standing in the doorway, shoulders rounded, watching her burn through the call like a fuse. When she hung up, he spoke cautiously. "We've got the joint savings. We could make an offer, maybe stop this before it." "It's not enough," she snapped, already pulling her phone toward her. "She's doing this to humiliate me." Hours later, the same offer landed in Victor Lee's inbox. Eleanor was sitting across from him in the tidy warmth of his office when he read it aloud. He looked over the rim of his glasses. "Partial payoff. Do you want me to counter?" Eleanor stirred the tea. Gloria had brought her in a paper cup, the spoon tapping the ceramic. "No," she said, her voice steady. "Let it run its course." Victor leaned back, watching her with something close to admiration. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she said, not looking at the papers, only at the rain trailing lazy paths down the window. That night, Khloe sat at Eleanor's kitchen table coloring in the quiet, while her grandmother washed dishes. The faint smell of garlic and rosemary hung in the air. The hum of the refrigerator filled the spaces between them. From the living room through the walls, they could hear Michelle and Trevor's voices carrying in low, jagged tones over the phone. Khloe's crayon slowed. She tilted her head, listening. "Did you used to cry like that too?" she asked, not looking up. Eleanor's hands stilled in the sink, warm water pooling around her fingers. She didn't answer right away. "Sometimes," she said finally, drying her hands on a towel. But not anymore. Khloe nodded once, as if filing the answer away for later. 2 mornings later, Eleanor drove past the old house on her way back from the market. The front yard was still trimmed neatly. Trevor's doing, no doubt, but there was an unfamiliar hollowness about the place, like it had shifted in its foundation. The porch light, the same one that had blinked awake the night Michelle locked her out, still flickered in stubborn pulses. She slowed the car but didn't stop, didn't knock. A moving van was parked 2 doors down, its ramp clanging as strangers carried someone else's boxes inside. That afternoon, Gloria arrived at Eleanor's door with a folder tucked under her arm, and the smell of diner coffee clinging to her coat. "People are starting to ask questions," she said, without preamble. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. The lien, the utilities, words spreading faster than Michelle's version of events. Gloria went on. "You'd be surprised how quick a story grows when the right ears catch it." Eleanor only nodded, setting out 2 mugs. "I'm not in a hurry to correct them." Across town, Michelle was at her dining table, unopened bills scattered like dropped cards. She'd been expecting the next envelope from the mortgage company, maybe a payment demand. Instead, the knock at her door delivered a uniformed courier with a clipboard. She signed without reading, too distracted to notice the return address. When she finally tore it open, her eyes scanned the letter in quick, jerky movements. Notice of intent to force sale. Her hands trembled as the weight of the words landed. Somewhere in the kitchen, the new backsplash gleamed under the light, a project built on credit that was now worth nothing at all. The invitation came by text. A time, a place, no explanation. Michelle called it a family conversation, but Eleanor knew the tone between the words. This wasn't about talking, it was about control. The meeting was set for late Sunday afternoon at the old house. Eleanor arrived on time, walking up the familiar path lined with freshly trimmed hedges. The porch light, still flickering, blinked at her like it was in on the joke. She rang the bell instead of using her key, hearing footsteps inside before Trevor opened the door with a tight smile. "Thanks for coming," he said, ushering her in. The air inside smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and the bitter edge of brewed coffee left too long on the burner. Michelle was already seated at the dining table, posture perfect, a folder in front of her like she was about to lead a corporate meeting. "We need to get past this," she began, her tone warm enough to be suspicious. Trevor took the seat beside her. "For Khloe's sake," he added, glancing at Eleanor as if the right combination of words could make this all disappear. Maybe it's time to let this go." Eleanor rested her hands on the table's edge, the wood worn smooth from decades of dinners. "Khloe's the only reason I didn't push harder." Michelle's eyes narrowed. "You're teaching her revenge." Eleanor met her gaze evenly. "No. I'm teaching her that women can keep receipts." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, tight as a pulled wire. Trevor shifted in his seat, Michelle's jaw working like she was chewing something bitter. From the corner of her eye, Eleanor caught movement on the staircase. Khloe sat halfway up, knees tucked to her chest, holding Eleanor's old black umbrella across her lap. The same umbrella from the night the locks had been changed. Her small fingers traced the wooden handle like it was something precious. Michelle noticed too, her eyes flicking toward the stairs. "Khloe, go to your room," she said sharply. Khloe hesitated, her gaze moving between them. Then she rose and padded upstairs without a word, the umbrella still in her arms. Michelle turned back to Eleanor, voice hardening. "I don't know what you think you're proving, but you're making a mess of all our lives." "You made the mess," Eleanor said softly. "I'm just refusing to clean it for you." Trevor started to speak, but Michelle's hand shot out, pressing against his forearm, a silent command. "This ends now," Michelle said. "Withdraw whatever it is you filed. Stop talking to Gloria, and stop showing up here like you own the place." Eleanor rose from her chair, picking up her coat from the backrest. "I don't show up, Michelle. I still live here, just not in this house." Michelle's mouth opened, but Eleanor was already turning toward the door. She didn't slam it. She didn't need to. Outside, the late afternoon light was heavy and gold, the kind that makes the edges of everything sharper. She walked down the path to her car, the sound of her shoes on the stone walkway crisp in the cool air. Her phone rang before she could start the engine. Victor's name lit the screen. "Eleanor," he said, his voice clipped. "They filed a countersuit." She let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "Of course they did. What's the claim?" "Elder fraud," Victor replied. "They're accusing you of manipulating your own finances for personal gain." Eleanor's eyes lifted to the house in her rearview mirror. The porch light blinked again, its flicker almost smug. The accusation arrived dressed in legal jargon, but the insult underneath was plain. Michelle was claiming her mother was too old, too confused, to have managed her own finances. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table with a neat stack of manila folders in front of her. The smell of coffee from the pot on the counter mixed with the faint lemon oil she'd used to polish the wood. Each folder had been labeled in her careful handwriting: tax returns, notarized signatures, proof of payments, and letters from her attorney documenting every decision she had made in the past year. When Gloria arrived, she found Eleanor cross-referencing dates with a yellow legal pad. "If you were any sharper," Gloria said, dropping her purse onto the chair across from her, "we'd all need band-aids." Eleanor didn't look up. "They think they can build a case on assumptions. I'm going to bury them in facts." At the courthouse 2 days later, Victor spread the documents across the polished table like a dealer laying down a winning hand. He walked the clerk through the paper trail: signed forms, notarized statements, and Eleanor's own written notes from each meeting. Michelle's attorney attempted to object, twice, but the judge's expression made it clear the fight was over before it began. When the decision came, it was crisp and unambiguous: baseless retaliatory claim, dismissed with prejudice. Michelle didn't meet Eleanor's eyes as she left the room. The day after, Khloe showed up at Eleanor's door with a folded slip of paper. "Dad asked me to give you this," she said, her voice carrying that mixture of shyness and seriousness she wore when delivering messages. Eleanor unfolded it. A single line in Trevor's cramped handwriting: "I never wanted this." She folded it back, tucking it into her apron pocket. "Thank you, honey," she said, and Khloe nodded, already moving toward the kitchen where Gloria had left a plate of cookies. That night, with the courthouse wind still fresh, Eleanor sat at her desk and pulled out her will. The pages were crisp, the ink steady. She added a clause in her own neat script. Khloe would inherit her home, but only on the condition that Michelle be legally separated from any financial control over her. When she slid the document across Victor's desk the next morning, he scanned it, then looked up. "You want me to structure this so there's no loophole?" "Yes," she said. "I want it airtight." Victor nodded once, a small smile playing at the edge of his mouth. "I can do airtight." The week passed without another direct confrontation from Michelle, but Eleanor could feel her daughter's frustration moving under the surface like a current. The contractors had stopped coming to the house. The blinds on the front windows stayed closed even on sunny afternoons. Eleanor had just finished making tea one quiet Thursday morning when the phone rang. The caller ID showed the bank's name. She picked up, her tone neutral. "Mrs. Grady, we're calling to verify a new refinance application connected to the property," the representative began. "It appears the applicant attempted to list a minor's trust account as collateral." The warmth drained from Eleanor's hands. "A minor's trust account? Yes, ma'am. The account lists a beneficiary named Khloe Grady." Eleanor's grip tightened on the receiver, the ceramic of her mug cooling against her other palm. "Do not approve it," she said, her voice low and even, "and send me the documentation immediately." She ended the call, staring out the kitchen window. Outside, the sky was a flat sheet of gray, the kind that promised rain but hadn't yet decided to fall. The house across the street blurred at the edges as her thoughts sharpened. Michelle had made her move, and this one was going to cost her more than money. The bank's email landed in Victor Lee's inbox before lunch. He read it twice, lips pressing into a line, then picked up the phone. By the time Eleanor arrived at his office, the blinds were drawn and the coffee on his desk had gone cold. "They didn't just try to tap into Khloe's account," Victor said, sliding a printed page toward her. They listed her trust as collateral for a refinance. Eleanor's eyes moved over the neat columns of text. She used her own daughter's name to. It's not just unethical, Victor said. It's potentially criminal. I'm contacting Child Protection Services today. By mid-afternoon, CPS had opened a file. The words financial endangerment and custody risk were typed into a caseworker's notes. Michelle's name was now tethered to both. Eleanor didn't go home immediately. Instead, she stopped at the paint store, choosing a pale, soft yellow from the wall of swatches. At the hardware store, she picked up a small bed frame and a mattress still sealed in plastic. Back in her rental, she moved through the spare room with a focus that steadied her hands. She painted the walls, the scent of fresh latex filling the air, then positioned the bed against the far wall where the afternoon light fell warm and even. A small quilt went over it, blue with tiny white flowers. If Khloe needed a place, she wouldn't arrive to find it unready. That evening, while Eleanor was in the yard trimming dead leaves from the potted hydrangea, Trevor appeared at the gate. He didn't come in right away. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes shadowed. "She's unraveling," he said finally. "Khloe's scared." Eleanor set down her shears. "She broke something in all of us, Trevor. This isn't about punishment anymore. It's about safety." His shoulders slumped. "I don't know how to fix this without blowing everything up." "Sometimes," Eleanor said quietly, "you don't get to keep both." The following Monday, Eleanor watched from the gallery as the court clerk handed folders to the judge. The emergency custody evaluation had been granted. CPS would assess Khloe's living situation over the next 10 days. Michelle sat at the table across the aisle, her hair pulled into a severe bun, her face drawn tight. She avoided Eleanor's gaze, flipping through her own copy of the paperwork as though the fine print might rewrite itself. Eleanor didn't look at Michelle. Her eyes stayed on the judge's hands, the pale skin stretched over knuckles as he turned each page. Back home, she kept busy. Laundry folded, the kitchen counters wiped until they shone, the yellow room aired out each morning. She noticed how the quilt caught the sun differently depending on the time of day. She caught herself imagining Khloe's sneakers kicked under the bed, a library book open on the nightstand. The house felt both lighter and heavier at once. On Thursday, the mailbox clanged shut behind her. Among the circulars and bills was an envelope addressed in Khloe's careful print. Eleanor carried it inside, the paper cool against her fingers. At the kitchen table, she slid it open with the edge of her thumbnail. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded twice. "If I have to leave," it read in uneven pencil strokes, "can I come to you?" The words blurred for a moment before settling again. Eleanor smoothed the page flat, her thumb lingering over the question mark. Outside, the wind rattled the branches, and somewhere in the distance, the first drops of rain began to fall. The courthouse smelled faintly polished wood and coffee gone stale. Eleanor sat at the petitioner's table, hands folded, the folded letter from Khloe resting beneath them like a hidden ace. Across the aisle, Michelle was whispering urgently to her attorney, her tailored blazer sharp against the washed-out lighting. The bailiff's voice carried easily. "Case number 25 FIS 1742, emergency custody hearing." Judge Harmon, a man whose lined face gave nothing away, adjusted his glasses and looked first to Michelle's side. "Miss Grady, you may begin." Michelle's voice was steady, practiced. She spoke of misunderstandings, of stress and the pressures of managing a household. She framed her actions as the choices of an overextended mother, not a malicious one. The words were polished, but her eyes kept darting toward Eleanor, like she was checking for cracks. When Trevor took the stand, his hands gripped the edges of the witness box. "I looked away," he admitted, voice rough. "That's on me. I should have stopped some of it before it got this far." His gaze flicked toward Eleanor, not pleading, not defensive, but resigned. Victor rose. "Your Honor, we'd like to enter into evidence a letter written by the minor Khloe Grady." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Eleanor stood, the paper light in her hands but heavy with its meaning. She unfolded it slowly, the sound of creasing paper echoing in the hushed room. Her voice was clear, steady. "If I have to leave, can I come to you?" When she looked up, the room was still. The shuffle of papers stopped. Even the court reporter's fingers paused over the keys for a beat before resuming. Michelle shifted in her seat, her jaw tight. The judge took a measured breath, eyes sweeping the room. "Given the evidence and the testimony heard today, this court grants temporary custody of the minor Khloe Grady to her grandmother, Eleanor Grady, pending a full review." The gavel's rap was sharp, final. Michelle's attorney leaned in close to her client, whispering quickly. Michelle's face flushed, her hand gripping the table until her knuckles blanched. Eleanor didn't look at her. She was already thinking about the yellow room at home. That evening, the sound of a car door closing brought Eleanor to the front window. Khloe stepped out, her small frame almost swallowed by her coat. In one hand she carried a drawing pad, in the other the handle of a rolling suitcase that bumped along the walkway. Another, slightly larger bag was slung over her shoulder. When Eleanor opened the door, Khloe didn't hesitate. She stepped into the warmth, setting her bags down by the entry. "This is everything?" Eleanor asked gently. Khloe nodded. "The rest isn't important." Upstairs, the yellow room glowed in the soft light of a new bedside lamp. The quilt lay smoothed, the air still carrying the faint scent of fresh paint. Khloe touched the corner of the blanket, then set her drawing pad on the nightstand. Eleanor tucked her in, brushing a strand of hair from her granddaughter's forehead. "No one locks you out in this house," she said. Khloe smiled faintly, closing her eyes. "I know." Downstairs, Eleanor poured herself a cup of tea. The quiet of the house was almost startling after the weight of the courtroom. She was halfway through her first sip when her phone buzzed on the counter. Victor's voice was clipped when she answered. "They're not done. Michelle's lawyer just filed a motion demanding the lien be withdrawn due to alleged undue influence." Eleanor set her cup down slowly, steam curling into the air between them. "Then we're still playing," she said. And in her mind she could already feel the pieces shifting for the next move. Victor's office was warmer than usual, the radiator humming faintly under the window. He slid a thick binder across the desk toward Eleanor, the kind of document that seemed to have its own weight in the air. "This," he said, tapping the cover, "is the full audit. Utilities in your name, unpaid property taxes, the attempted misuse of Khloe's trust, every cent accounted for." Eleanor opened it. The pages were dense with numbers, the kind that could drain the color from a person's face. $93,412, Victor said, reading her silence. "And that's before interest." Michelle's motion to have the lien withdrawn had been denied earlier that morning. The judge's ruling was crisp, valid, and enforceable. "She thought she could erase the debt," Victor went on, "but we're going to make it permanent. I'm converting the lien into a structured debt judgment, monthly payments, garnished if necessary. She can't sidestep it now." Eleanor traced a fingertip along one of the printed totals. "Make sure there's no escape clause." Victor's mouth curved. "You think I'd let her out of this?" By the end of the week, the local paper had picked up the story. On page 3, beneath a headline about the school board budget, a smaller one stood out. "Woman forces accountability for elder neglect and wins." The article didn't name Michelle, but it didn't have to. The phrases "family property dispute" and "adult child" were enough for the community to connect the dots. That afternoon, Eleanor's mailbox held 3 letters from strangers. Each envelope bore handwriting in different styles, looping cursive, shaky block print, something in between. "You did what we were afraid to," one read. Another said, "I wish I'd fought like you did. Maybe I wouldn't have lost my house." The third was short and unsentimental. "Thank you. You reminded me it's not too late." Eleanor kept them in the same drawer as Khloe's letter. Gloria showed up on Eleanor's porch the next morning with a laptop tucked under her arm. "I've set up an anonymous email," she announced, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Anything Michelle does online, applications, bank forms, credit pulls, it'll ping us." Eleanor poured her a cup of coffee. And how did you manage that? Gloria shrugged. Let's just say working for an accountant for 20 years teaches you where the digital footprints hide. By the following Tuesday, the first ping came in. Michelle had tried to open a new checking account at a different credit union, likely to shield incoming funds. Within hours, the court clerk had processed Eleanor's judgment paperwork, and a wage garnishment order was drafted. Victor called Eleanor in the late afternoon, his voice calm but carrying a quiet satisfaction. She'll be getting her first debt notice this week. 25% of her paycheck will be redirected to you until the balance is paid in full. Eleanor stood at her kitchen counter, one hand resting on the cool edge of the sink. Then she'll finally understand what it feels like to have something taken from you without permission. Across town, Michelle's workday ended with a courier envelope on her desk. The return address was the court's. She slid it open without ceremony, eyes skimming the first few lines before stopping cold at the word garnishment. The hum of the office copier seemed louder in the sudden ringing of her ears. She gripped the paper tighter, the edges cutting faintly into her skin. Her wages, her carefully crafted income stream, were no longer fully hers. And every month, a portion of it would flow directly to the mother she'd once locked out in the rain. The first deduction hit Michelle's paycheck on a Thursday morning. She opened her online banking app in the break room, the hum of the vending machine filling the quiet, and saw the numbers, 25% gone before it had even reached her hands. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. HR had sent a polite, impersonal message: court-mandated garnishment processed. Please direct questions to the issuing authority. Michelle locked her screen hard enough to make the plastic click. That same afternoon, Trevor stopped by the bank on his lunch break. He signed the withdrawal slip with quick, deliberate strokes, transferring every cent of his share from their joint account into a separate one. The teller didn't comment, but her glance was brief and knowing. By the time Michelle checked the account that evening, the balance was lower than she'd expected, lower than she could cover without feeling the pinch. Meanwhile, at Eleanor's rental, the air felt lighter. Khloe had taken to sitting cross-legged on the living room floor after school, a box of colored pencils spread out beside her. She was drawing rainbows now, each one layered and bright, their arcs precise like she wanted them to last. Eleanor would pass through the room, pausing to look. That one's almost perfect, she'd say. They're all perfect, Khloe replied, her voice quieter but no longer weighed down. One evening, Eleanor sat at her desk, the lamplight pooling over fresh legal documents. She read the wording twice before signing: Khloe Marie Grady shall inherit my home and property, no contest. Victor had drafted it so tightly, even the most determined lawyer wouldn't find daylight through it. Eleanor set down the pen and felt a small, quiet satisfaction bloom. Some things, once written, could not be undone. Across town, Michelle's shine was wearing off. The women she used to meet for brunch were suddenly too busy. The text threads that once buzzed with invitations had thinned to silence. She noticed the glances when she walked into the diner, some curious, some sharp, a few tinged with pity. The image she'd built over years, a success story, the self-made woman, was cracking in public view, and people were stepping back, not wanting to be caught in the fallout. It was just after dinner one night when the knock came at Eleanor's door. The woman standing there was someone she vaguely recognized from the old neighborhood, tall, with a cardigan pulled tight around her, and a look that mixed regret with something like defiance. I don't want to be in the middle, the woman said, but I think you should see this. She handed Eleanor a thick manila envelope. It was heavy, the kind of weight that came from years of accumulation. When Eleanor brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table, Khloe was upstairs reading. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock on the wall. She opened the flap. Inside were receipts, notes, and clipped photographs, records of pettiness stretched across years, things Michelle had bought with Eleanor's money without permission, snide comments scribbled on holiday cards, little acts that on their own might have seemed forgettable, but together told a different story. Halfway through the stack, she found a folded piece of cardstock. The colors caught her first. The faded pastels of something handmade. She opened it, and her breath caught. It was a birthday card she had made years ago. Watercolor flowers, painted in careful strokes, her own handwriting wishing Michelle a year of joy. The card had been torn clean in half, the rip slicing through the message. She set it down slowly, her fingers resting on the jagged edge where the two halves no longer fit perfectly together. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the branches against the side of the house like knuckles on a door. The torn birthday card still lay on the kitchen table the next morning, its jagged edge catching the light. Eleanor studied it for a moment longer, then slid it into a drawer beside the letters from strangers and Khloe's note. When she arrived at Victor's office later that day, the rain was starting again, thin, slanting, insistent. She closed her umbrella in the entryway, water pooling on the mat, and sat across from him. "Is foreclosure still possible?" she asked. Victor didn't hesitate. "Yes. The debt's unpaid. The judgment stands. If you want to move forward, it's time," she said. The process unfolded faster than Michelle could react. Notices were posted, court filings stamped, signatures signed in triplicate. Eleanor didn't attend the final auction. She didn't need to watch the last threads of her daughter's hold on the house snap. By the end of the month, the property, once her home, then her exile, was legally hers again. The documents arrived in a thick envelope. She opened them at her kitchen table, the paper heavy, the language dry and absolute. On the day the movers came for Michelle's remaining things, Eleanor drove past slowly, Khloe in the back seat. Boxes were stacked on the curb under a sky swollen with clouds. A sofa leaned awkwardly on its side. In the moving truck, Khloe looked through the window, her voice quiet. It always felt cold there. Eleanor glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Some houses stay that way, no matter what you put in them. Trevor moved into a small studio near the edge of town, a building with peeling paint but a view of the river. He'd left a brief voicemail for Eleanor. "I hope you know I never wanted it to end like this." She didn't call back, but she didn't delete it either. Michelle left town without fanfare. No goodbyes, no explanations, just a change of address form, filed with the post office, and a silence that was for once welcome. 2 weeks later, Gloria walked into Eleanor's kitchen, carrying a pie still warm from the oven, the scent of cinnamon and butter filling the room. She set it down with a grin that reached her eyes. "You did it," Gloria said, sliding 2 plates from the cabinet without asking, and without shouting once. Eleanor poured coffee into mismatched mugs. Noise wouldn't have changed anything. Paperwork did. They ate in companionable quiet, the rain tapping the windows like a steady metronome. That afternoon, the rain had eased to a mist. Eleanor and Khloe left the house for the cafe at the corner. They shared the old black umbrella, the fabric still holding the faint smell of damp wood from years past. The air was cool, the streets shining under the gray light. As they walked, Khloe leaned into her grandmother's side, just enough for Eleanor to feel the small weight. The umbrella shifted slightly, covering them both. Back home, as Eleanor hung the umbrella by the door, Khloe dug into her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I made you something." Eleanor took it, smoothing the creases. The drawing was simple but full. 3 figures, Grandma, me, and our house. Above them the sky was blue, the sun spilling yellow across the roof. "It's us," Khloe said, watching her face. Eleanor felt the corners of her mouth lift. "It is." She set the drawing on the table, her eyes lingering on the sun. For the first time in years, it didn't feel out of place. The first thing she fixed was the porch. The same board she had once sat on, soaked to the skin, now lay stripped of rot and sanded smooth. The scent of cut cedar drifted through the late spring air, mingling with the sharp tang of fresh paint. Each hammer strike echoed with quiet finality, the sound of reclaiming, not just the wood, but the right to sit there without waiting for permission. Khloe sat cross-legged on the steps, watching her work. "It looks different," she said. Eleanor tightened the last screw. "It feels different." A week later they turned to the backyard. The soil was still cool from the rain, smelling of earth and something green waking up. Together they dug small, careful holes, dropping in marigolds, basil, and a few tomato starts. When they were finished, Khloe stood back, hands on her hips. What should we call it? Eleanor brushed dirt from her gloves. How about the no-drama patch? Khloe grinned. Perfect. From then on, they tended it together, watering in the mornings, checking leaves for pests in the afternoons. It was slow work, the kind that let conversation wander without pressure. Gloria stopped by one afternoon with a folder under her arm. You know, she said, leaning on the porch railing, there's a community grant for home restoration. You could get some help finishing this place. Eleanor arched an eyebrow. And you just happened to have the application. Gloria's smile was unapologetic. I filled out half of it for you already. 3 weeks later the letter arrived. Approved. The grant would cover everything from new gutters to fresh paint for the shutters. Eleanor read it twice, the words sinking in like sunlight after a long winter. Meanwhile, Khloe had been spending her evenings at the kitchen table, colored pencils spread in a neat fan. She never said what she was working on, only that it was for school. The day of the art contest, Eleanor walked her into the gymnasium, the walls lined with rows of paintings and drawings. When they reached Khloe's entry, Eleanor stopped. It was the yellow room, rendered in bright, warm tones, with light spilling across the quilt. The title card beneath it read, My Safe Place. When the winners were announced, Khloe's name was called first. She accepted the ribbon with a shy smile, then immediately turned to find her grandmother in the crowd. The following weekend, Eleanor stood at the edge of the porch, phone in hand. She took a picture of Khloe standing in front of the house, the old black umbrella open above her head, even though the sky was clear. She posted it online with a simple caption, Some storms bring clarity. By the end of the day, the picture had more comments than anything she'd ever shared. Old friends, neighbors, even strangers left messages of congratulations, their words a quiet chorus of approval. That evening, as they sat on the porch with glasses of lemonade, Khloe looked out toward the garden, the marigolds already beginning to bud. Grandma? She asked softly. Eleanor turned toward her. Yes? Khloe's eyes stayed on the house, her voice careful, almost tentative. Can I call this our home now? The question hung in the air, warm as the fading light, waiting for its answer. The final payment landed on a Tuesday. Eleanor saw the deposit notification on her phone while rinsing breakfast dishes, the cool scent of lemon soap in the air. The figure matched the balance Victor had calculated months earlier, down to the last cent. No message accompanied it. No apology, no explanation, just the transaction, as mechanical and impersonal as a parking ticket being paid. She dried her hands on a dish towel, the phone screen going dark in her palm. It was over, at least in numbers. That afternoon, she sat at her desk, the blinds tilted to let in a soft band of light across the paperwork waiting there. The funds transfer form was already filled out, every dollar from the payment moving into a college account in Khloe's name alone. She signed in steady ink, the pen gliding without pause. When the bank confirmed the deposit, Eleanor imagined the years ahead, tuition bills paid without worry, doors opening before Khloe even knew she wanted to walk through them. This money would no longer carry the sour weight of its origin. It would be clean, transformed. The next document was thicker. The deed to her home. It had traveled a long road back to her hands, and now she was ready to place it somewhere it could never be taken again. She signed it into a trust, Khloe as the sole beneficiary. No contest, no loopholes, no interference. Victor had been thorough. When the time comes, he'd said, it will pass straight to her. No one else will have a claim. Eleanor pressed her signature into place, feeling a quiet sense of permanence settle in her chest. Later, she stepped onto the porch. The boards were dry and smooth under her slippers, the repairs now part of the house's bones. She draped a warm blanket across her lap and held her coffee close, the steam curling into the damp afternoon air. Beyond the yard, the first drops of rain began to fall, gentle even without wind. It tapped on the roof in a soft rhythm, not a threat but a reminder. Behind her the door stood open. Footsteps approached, light and unhurried. Khloe emerged, sweater sleeves pushed over her hands, something tucked under her arm. She sat beside Eleanor, close enough for their shoulders to touch, and handed over a folded sheet of paper. "I made you this," she said. Eleanor unfolded it carefully. The drawing showed two figures, her and Khloe standing under the biggest umbrella Eleanor had ever seen, the arcs of rain bending around it instead of through. Behind them stood the house, bright and solid, with sunlight breaking in the corner of the page. The umbrella's handle curved just like the old wooden one by the door. Eleanor looked at the drawing for a long moment, tracing the pencil lines and colored arcs. Then she reached over, resting her hand on Khloe's. "It's perfect," she said. Khloe leaned against her, watching the rain bead and roll down the porch railing. "It's big enough for both of us," she murmured, as if the umbrella in the picture could stretch into real life. Eleanor smiled, sipping her coffee as the rain fell steady around them, the open door behind her letting warmth spill out onto the porch. She thought of that first night in the rain, the locked door, the sound of laughter from inside. And now this porch, this blanket, this house. The quiet was no longer empty. It was chosen. "She left me out in the storm," Eleanor thought, her eyes on the horizon. "I left her in the past and built a future that never owed her a thing."